My name is Dacre Stoker, and I'm the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. I'm the co-author, along with Ian Holt, of Dracula the Undead, a sequel that we have decided is going to be the consummate partner to Bram's Dracula. We pick up the action 25 years later after his story ends and bring our readers on what we think is a really interesting and wild ride, but very true to the style of Bram Stoker.
Well, Bram Stoker set the standard for vampires in literature and movies by taking a little bit from everywhere. Vampires started out as these hideous creatures from the grave, and they were almost like George Romero's zombies in Night of the Living Dead. And then over time, they slowly became more human. And then Bram had the idea of making him a noble, an aristocrat with this great warrior past, and that made him monomaniacal, all that stuff. So he created that central villain character that oversees everything with a special skill set, that the heroes have to figure out that skill set and then find a way to defeat him.
Dracula's appeared in over 160 films, and he was a main character that people just swooned all over. He even scared people. People fainted in the original stage productions. So he was this very identifiable character. I mean, to this day, you look at him, the Count in Sesame Street and Count Chocula. So he's a pretty identifiable icon, great target for all the marketing, and then therefore that's how we all identify with him.
It really took off. It was a merger of Bram and Bela Lugosi, where the modern vampire that we all know is really both of those two combined, because Dracula's vampire, again, was hunched over, bad breath, hair on his palms, goatee, he was old, he smelled bad like he was the stench of the grave. And then came Lugosi, and he was suave, and he had that, he didn't speak English, so he had to sound it out phonetically, all his dialogue on the play. So it actually made him even more mysterious. And I think together, what Bela Lugosi read into Bram, that if we look at ourselves, we have this inner desire to be the vampire. We want to live forever. Death is our greatest fear. If we get angry, we have the rule of law to stop us. Dracula doesn't. If he's lonely and he needs a friend, he can just find somebody and bite him on the neck. He's got a new friend. If he's in love with a girl, come to me, and he's got a girlfriend, and for most people, that's pretty enticing.
Well, Ian and I have written a sequel to Dracula called Dracula the Undead, which picks up the action 25 years after the end of Bram's story, with extensive research of Bram Stoker's notes, biographies of my great-granduncle, as well as some interesting anecdotes from members of the family. We also continue the tradition that Bram started of being historically accurate by utilizing precise locations, travel schedules, street names, original subway stations, all of which were correct in London and Paris in 1912, which was when our novel took place.
Well, one of the great joys of doing Dracula the Undead with Dacre Stoker was that we got to go to the Rosenbach Museum and see Bram's notes. And there's one page there, which I call the Vampire 10 Commandments. And with that page, Bram becomes like the vampire Moses. Because on that page, he lists the traits of Dracula, which then became the traits of all vampires from that point on in literature and in film. Now, they all varied a little bit, but the standards are there. Immortality, the presence of fangs, need to drink blood to sustain themselves, wooden stake through the heart would kill you, you can make other vampires. For Bram, it was the sunlight would weaken him, which later became in Nosferatu, the sunlight would kill them. But all those standards that he wrote, right there is where everyone gets them, from Lost Boys to Twilight to True Blood. It's all the same. Even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's all there. Whichever vampires you like, it started on that page with Bram.
Today's vampires stay true to Bram Stoker's vision in some ways, and in other ways they depart. Lestat, for instance, the central vampire from Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, is a bloodsucker who stays true to Stoker's vision of a true vampire. He's telepathic, he has immense strength, he can fly, and he can even survive exposure to the sun. He's got a bit of a conscience, too. This is something that Anne introduces. He's got a conscience. He's got to wrestle sort of with, does he kill for pleasure or does he kill for need? And, we've seen some of that in Bram's as well. Laurel K. Hamilton's books, Anita Blake, Vampire Hunter, takes the form of this more vampire romance type figures. These sorts of stories sort of provide this vampire mythos, and it's still very popular, but it's sort of changed over time. The modern reader doesn't want to read just a vampire seducing a woman. It's got to take on a little bit more pizzazz. Now in Twilight, Stephanie Meyer prefers to paint the vampire as a dangerous object of desire, a sometimes unattainable lover. This comes into true focus with Edward Cullen. While Edward does display some characteristics of the traditional vampire, such as change in appearance, he doesn't feed, superhuman strength, and he has that capability to seduce women. I've heard from Stephanie Meyer in written articles that she hasn't read Bram Stoker, so that sort of explains maybe why she has deviated from the past as well. But that's okay. In my opinion, I think it's a great thing that these vampires have morphed into the teenage genre. I mean, their life is horrific as it is. Why not give them some vampires to really give them some spice? Now, Bill Compton from HBO's TV series, The True Blood, he shows sort of an unusual compassion for human life, which is definitely, a departure from Bram Stoker's character. But to me, Bill is the consummate outsider, a fish out of water. He comes very involved in relationships simply because he wants to fit in, despite what he really is.
Each generation redefines vampires. Frank Langella in the 70s, you had the very sexualized vampires. In the 90s with Gary Oldman, you had this existential, could he be redeemed? Just as the wall fell and the Russian Federation rose up and the Soviet Union fell, and now the Russians who were the bad guys were now the good guys and our friends, so you could be redeemed. And then you come to Stephanie Meyer. And she's bringing a whole new generation, saying a hopeful vision. Maybe these are the kids that rose up and voted for Obama and said, yes, we can. And this is their vampires. And I think the one thing for sure is, if you look at Brahms' 10 Commandments of Vampires, she pretty much follows the rules. Brahms says, if you're out in the sunlight, they only get weekends. So I don't know if she's ever read Brahms. We hear sometimes she has, sometimes she hasn't. But I consider Stephanie Meyer and all her vampires like Dracula the Undead and Twilight series. We're blood brothers and blood sisters. We all are born from that same page that Bram wrote way, way back in the 1800s.